Spoiled son of a millionaire, chokes black Housekeeper's daughter, not knowing she's a boxer. The moment it happened, the air in that lavish marble hallway froze. Money had always shielded him, his arrogance fed by endless privilege, his cruelty sharpened by knowing no one ever told him no. But that night, when his hand wrapped around her throat, he thought she was powerless. He thought she was just the maid's daughter, someone invisible, someone beneath him. What he didn't know was that behind her silence lived fire. Behind her polite smiles lived fists trained to fight. And behind her tears lived a strength no amount of money could ever buy. This isn't just a story about violence. It's a story about the ugliness of racism, the arrogance of privilege, and the dangerous lies we tell ourselves about who matters and who doesn't. What happened in that mansion that night shattered more than silence. It exposed the brutal truth that justice doesn't always wear silk suits. Sometimes it wears boxing gloves. The son's name was Brandon, and his life had been shaped by walls of privilege so high that he never had to look over them. From the moment he was born, silver spoons and diamond chandeliers were his normal. He lived in a mansion where silence wasn't peace, but control, where the staff moved like shadows, making sure the world around him looked perfect. Every tantrum he threw as a child was met not with discipline, but with indulgence. When he broke toys, more were bought. When he disrespected teachers, they were reminded of who his father was. The cycle repeated until arrogance hardened into entitlement, and entitlement into cruelty. He didn't see people as equals, he saw them as tools, each with a role to serve his wants. The housekeeper who worked in his father's home had endured his snide comments, his dismissive tone, and the way he spat out words like, "you people," as if her presence in his world was a stain. She tolerated it because she had to, because her paycheck meant survival, because her daughter's future depended on it. She held her tongue through humiliation after humiliation, knowing that walking away meant losing everything she'd fought so hard to provide. Her daughter, Maya, grew up in the same house, but in a different universe. While Brandon lived among excess, Maya lived among caution. She knew how to make herself small, how to move silently, how to disappear when voices rose. She had been taught to blend into the background, not out of fear of who she was, but out of awareness of what the world expected her to be. At school, she worked harder than anyone else, pushing against the weight of assumptions about where she came from and what she could become. At home, she trained her body in the boxing gym, a place where sweat and bruises turned into strength and discipline, a place where she could let out the anger she had no room to show in that mansion's halls. Brandon never noticed her beyond her mother's shadow, never cared to look past the uniform, the quiet nods, the way she avoided his gaze. To him, she wasn't worth seeing. To him, she was background noise. But every ignored glance, every moment of invisibility carved resilience into her, preparing her for a day neither of them could have imagined. What Brandon didn't know was that Maya's silence was not weakness, it was armor, and one night his arrogance would collide head on with the strength he never thought she had. It began like so many nights in that mansion, with music spilling down the stairs and laughter echoing through the corridors. Brandon and his friends had been drinking, their voices louder than the bass that shook the crystal glasses in the dining room. They stormed into the kitchen, eyes glazed with intoxication, carrying the weight of their entitlement like a weapon. The staff scattered quietly, used to these late-night intrusions, used to the way their presence was treated as entertainment or as targets for ridicule. Maya was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, water running as she rinsed the dishes her mother hadn't yet gotten to. She didn't look at them. She had learned not to. But Brandon's eyes, searching for something to amuse his boredom, landed on her. A smirk crept across his face. "Hey," he slurred, pointing at her like she was an object. "What are you even doing here? This isn't your house. This is a party, not a shelter." His friends chuckled, nudging each other, waiting for more. Maya's silence was deliberate, a shield built from years of surviving moments just like this. She kept scrubbing, hoping her stillness would make her invisible again. But her lack of reaction only fueled Brandon's ego. He thrived on being seen, on being acknowledged, on having his words sting. Her refusal to play his game felt like an insult he couldn't ignore. His tone sharpened, louder now, dripping with the venom of entitlement. "Don't you dare ignore me." He staggered closer, his friends egging him on with whistles and laughter, feeding the fire of his rage. The air thickened, charged with the ugly energy of men who knew they could do whatever they pleased. Brandon reached out suddenly, grabbing her arm with a force that made the dish in her hand slip and crash against the sink. Maya's breath caught, but she stayed steady, her face calm, her eyes fixed on the floor. The laughter behind him grew crueler, echoing in her ears like knives. In his drunken haze, silence felt like defiance, and defiance was something Brandon could not tolerate. His hand moved from her arm to her throat, wrapping around it, squeezing just enough to remind her of his power. For him, it wasn't about drunken anger anymore. It was about dominance, about proving to everyone watching that he could break her without consequence. The music from upstairs still pounded, but in that kitchen, every sound seemed to disappear except the sharp breaths between them. Her mother's cry pierced the air as she rushed forward. Panic itched across her face, but before she could reach her daughter, Brandon's friends stepped in. They blocked her path with mocking grins, pushing her back as if her desperation was entertainment. One of them laughed cruelly, tossing out a slur that burned deeper than the scene unfolding before her. Maya could feel her mother's fear vibrating in the room, but she couldn't let that fear dictate her. Her body tensed, not in panic but in control. She had been here before, not with Brandon, but in the gym where she pushed through exhaustion, where coaches barked at her to hold her ground, where she learned how to turn vulnerability into strength. Every bead of sweat shed in training had carved discipline into her bones. Every punch against the bag had prepared her to stand tall when the world tried to push her down. Brandon's grip was strong, clumsy but forceful, fueled by drunken pride rather than skill. His eyes searched as expecting tears, expecting begging, expecting submission. But what he found unsettled him. She didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, unbroken, carrying a calm that mocked his fury. In that silence, in that refusal to crumble, he saw something foreign. Resistance. It rattled him in ways his ego couldn't explain. His friends noticed too. Their laughter faltered, unease creeping into the edges of their mockery as they saw the girl who wasn't reacting the way victims were supposed to. Her hands rose, not trembling but precise, her fingers pressing against his wrist with trained efficiency. In one swift motion, she broke his hold, twisting out of his grip like she had practiced 100 times before in self-defense drills. The sudden release caught him off guard, his balance shaken, his dominance slipping away in front of the very audience that once worshipped his cruelty. He stumbled back, shocked, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Brandon, who had always been untouchable, had been resisted. Maya didn't move to attack. She stood steady, her chest rising and falling with quiet strength. This was not a girl breaking under pressure. This was a fighter, one shaped not by privilege but by necessity, one who carried in her silence the weight of battles no one in that room had ever had to fight. For the first time, Brandon realized he wasn't the predator in this story. The tension in the room thickened as Brandon's pride shattered in front of the very friends who had always fed his arrogance. His face flushed red, not just from alcohol but from humiliation, from the sting of being challenged by someone he believed was beneath him. Fury overtook reason, and he lunged again, this time with a wild swing meant to reassert his dominance. His movement was sloppy, clumsy, every ounce of drunken aggression telegraphed in advance. But Maya had spent years reading punches faster and sharper than his. Her body reacted before her mind had to, sidestepping with the fluidity of someone who had drilled that motion countless times under the fluorescent lights of a boxing gym. His fist cut through empty air, and in that split second of imbalance, her knuckles connected with his midsection. The impact was clean, controlled, not reckless but deliberate, knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled back, gasping, clutching his stomach, his arrogance collapsing with his breath. The kitchen filled with shocked silence, broken only by his labored wheeze. His friends froze, their earlier laughter strangled by disbelief, their eyes darting between him and the girl they had dismissed moments before. No one had ever laid hands on Brandon, not in public, not in private, not without consequences that money could erase. Yet here he was, bent over, struggling to breathe, facing the strength of someone he never thought mattered. Maya didn't follow up with another strike. She didn't need to. Her stance alone told the story, feet planted, shoulders squared, fists steady but restrained. Every line of her body spoke of training, of discipline, of control that stood in stark contrast to his reckless rage. She wasn't attacking to destroy him, she was defending herself, showing him and everyone in that room that she refused to be broken. Her calm presence unsettled them more than any flurry of punches could have. The same girl they had tried to erase with insults and intimidation now stood taller than all of them without raising her voice. Even the air felt different, charged not with Brandon's dominance but with Maya's quiet authority. In that moment, she wasn't just a daughter of the help. She was every unacknowledged strength, every silenced voice, every underestimated fighter rolled into one. The room no longer belonged to Brandon, with his drunken power plays and inherited arrogance. It belonged to the girl who had been invisible until the moment she chose not to be. The aftermath descended in a storm of voices, the kind that rattled through the mansion's gilded halls. Brandon's father came crashing down the staircase, his expensive shoes pounding against the marble, his face twisted with anger at the chaos beneath his roof. His eyes went straight to his son, hunched over and clutching his stomach, then to Maya, standing still with the mark of his son's hand faintly reddened across her throat. In an instant, Brandon's lies poured out, frantic and desperate, painting himself as the victim, spinning a story where he had been attacked unprovoked. His father, accustomed to covering for him, latched onto those words, using them as a shield against the truth forming in the room. But this time the story wasn't his alone to tell. Too many had seen. The staff lingered at the edges of the kitchen, eyes wide, whispers stirring like wind through dry leaves. Brandon's friends, usually eager to back his every word, looked uneasy now, their silence betraying cracks in the usual loyalty. The housekeeper stood trembling, her heart pulled in two directions, fear that speaking up would mean losing the job that kept her family afloat, and pride that her daughter had refused to be broken. Her hands shook, but her eyes glistened with something fierce as she looked at Maya. The bruises rising on her daughter's skin were evidence that no lie could wash away. Brandon's father tried to raise his voice, to drown out the murmurs, but the weight of the truth was heavier than even his wealth. Rumors were already beginning to take shape, not just within the walls of the mansion, but beyond them. The staff would talk, neighbors would notice. At the boxing gym where Maya trained, people would hear whispers of what she had endured and how she had stood her ground. It was a story that couldn't be silenced, no matter how many checks were written. Brandon's entitlement had always shielded him, but now it had left him exposed because he had underestimated the very person he tried to crush. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence, the same silence he once mocked, now carried more power than all his shouting. She knew this fight was bigger than him, bigger than the mansion, bigger than that night. Tomorrow she would still face a world where the color of her skin would be judged before the strength of her spirit. But tonight, she had reminded everyone that resilience cannot be bought. Racism and privilege feed on silence. They thrive when the powerful believe the powerless will bow, will endure, will keep their heads down to survive. But silence cracks when truth stands tall. Maya's story isn't just about a spoiled millionaire's son choking the daughter of a housekeeper. It's about how easily arrogance mistakes kindness for weakness, and how easily cruelty underestimates resilience. She didn't just defend herself. She reminded everyone in that room that human dignity is not for sale. That strength doesn't always come wrapped in money or status. Sometimes it comes from the ones society tries hardest to erase. We live in a world where injustice wears expensive suits, but justice, real justice, often wears calloused hands and a steady gaze. So the next time someone believes their power makes them untouchable, remember Maya. Remember that even the quietest voices can carry thunder. And remember that no matter how deep injustice runs, resistance always finds a way to rise.